Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. I had spent the entire morning wrapping gifts and baking cookies, humming softly to the carols playing in the background. The tree shimmered with lights, and the fireplace crackled with warmth. Everything was perfect, or so I believed. When Amanda, my only daughter, entered the room, her expression was distant, colder than the December wind outside. She handed me a small folded note without a word, her fingers trembling slightly. I opened it slowly, confusion growing in my chest. The words hit me like a slap. You have 48 hours to move out. Merry Christmas. I looked up, stunned, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a joke. But she only crossed her arms and stared. My heart stopped, and in that moment, so did Christmas. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I searched her face for any sign of hesitation, of guilt, but there was only resolve. She turned away as if this act of cruelty was just another task on her holiday list. I reached out, instinctively, but she stepped back. It's time, she said flatly. I looked at the tree, at the cookies, at the gifts still unwrapped beneath the branches, symbols of a holiday that no longer meant anything. The silence between us was deafening. I had given her everything. And now, with a few heartless words, she was giving me the street. I held back tears as I folded the note, my fingers stiff with disbelief. My own daughter had exiled me on Christmas Day. Amanda justified her cruelty with the word space, as if I were a piece of furniture she no longer had room for. She said I was a burden, that my presence stressed her marriage, that she needed to move forward. I wanted to scream. I had raised her alone, sacrificed every part of myself so she could have everything: school, comfort, dreams. I worked nights at the hospital, cleaned offices on weekends, skipped meals to pay for her ballet lessons. I remembered crying quietly in the kitchen so she wouldn't hear, believing it was worth it if she had a better life. And now, she tossed me aside like a cracked ornament after the holiday season. No gratitude. No remorse. Just cold detachment in a house I helped build. Still, I didn't cry. Not yet. I walked slowly to my room, that same room I had once painted with pastel pink walls when Amanda was 5. I packed what I could: a few clothes, a framed photo of us when she was a child, my wedding ring from her father. Each item felt heavier than the last. Her husband didn't speak. He stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes averted. I waited for him to intervene, to say this was too much, but he remained silent, a willing accomplice. The love I had once felt in this home evaporated with every step toward the door. As I closed the suitcase, I realized something that shattered me more than her words: she had stopped loving me a long time ago. She had just waited for the right moment to make it official. I stood in the hallway, one last desperate attempt building in my throat. Amanda, where will I go? I asked, my voice low and trembling. I'm 73. I have nowhere. She didn't blink. Figure it out, Mom. You've always been so strong. Her tone was condescending, almost mocking. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away like I was contagious. Her husband cleared his throat but said nothing. I looked at the staircase we used to sit on together, reading bedtime stories. It now felt like a museum of someone else's life. I had given her roots, wings, love. She gave me silence, indifference, exile. There was no point in begging anymore. Pride and pain wrapped around my chest like barbed wire. I zipped the suitcase and dragged it toward the door, every step echoing with betrayal. No hug. No apology. Not even a proper goodbye. She returned to the living room, to her gifts and hot cocoa, as if nothing had happened. I looked back one last time, hoping she'd change her mind, that some sliver of humanity would break through. But her back remained turned. The door clicked behind me with finality. Snowflakes danced in the cold air outside, but none stung more than the frost in my daughter's heart. My journey had begun, not just through the city, but through the ruins of a love I thought unbreakable. The boarding house smelled of mildew and forgotten lives. My room was small, barely wide enough for the creaky bed and chipped dresser. The radiator groaned like an old man, and cold wind slipped through the broken window pane. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching Amanda's baby photo, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp outside. It felt like I had been buried alive in silence, discarded by the one person I thought would never let me go. At night, I wrapped myself in two thin blankets and whispered prayers to a God I wasn't sure still listened. The walls were thin, and I could hear the man next door coughing endlessly, a constant reminder that I was not alone in misery. I refused to cry. Tears felt too luxurious, too indulgent for someone who had to count coins to buy bread. I stared at the ceiling until sleep took me, not gently, but like a collapse. That room didn't just hold my body, it trapped my soul. The silence brought memories I couldn't escape. I remembered the long nights at the diner, cleaning tables until my back screamed, just to make enough for Amanda's field trip. I remembered her tiny hands holding mine, promising she'd never leave me. Now, those memories mocked me like ghosts, lingering where love used to live. The sacrifices were real, but they meant nothing to her now. Each night, I sat with those memories like old companions. I didn't regret what I gave, only that it had been thrown away so easily. I wondered if she had forgotten the night her fever hit 104, and I slept sitting up, holding her. I wondered if she remembered how I sold my necklace to buy her prom dress. All those acts of love, erased with one cold sentence on Christmas morning. One gray afternoon, I struggled to carry a bag of groceries up the steps. My fingers were numb, and my legs weak from the cold. A woman appeared beside me, steadying the bag with firm hands and a warm smile. "I'm Teresa," she said softly, her eyes kind. She walked me up to my door and didn't ask questions, just offered her help like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, Teresa knocked gently and handed me a bowl of steaming soup. We talked about nothing at first, the weather, the neighborhood, but her presence chipped away at the numbness inside me. She didn't pity me. She saw me. For the first time in weeks, I felt human again. It wasn't salvation, not yet, but it was a beginning. While we drank chamomile tea in my freezing room, Teresa looked at me with eyes that didn't judge but understood. "You're not powerless," she said. "You're just used to giving everything without asking anything back." Her words struck deeper than she knew, because no one had ever told me that before. I had built my life around sacrifice, not realizing it had become a cage. That night, I lay awake, hearing those words over and over until they turned into a seed of rebellion inside me. The next morning, I looked at my hands, worn, tired, but still capable. I walked to the mirror and didn't see a victim, I saw a woman who had survived worse. Teresa's words began to shape something in me I hadn't felt in years: self-worth. I made a list of things I still had, not material, but mine. My voice. My dignity. My will. And I decided that being discarded would no longer define me. I returned to the house one final time while Amanda was away. I told myself it was only to collect a few forgotten things, but something in me needed closure. As I entered the attic, memories clung to the dust like old perfume. I opened an untouched box labeled Dad and found letters, faded pictures, and a deed I had forgotten existed. My father's land, left to me years ago, still in my name and completely untouched. I sat on the wooden floor as sunlight filtered through a crack in the roof. The paper in my hands felt like a lifeline. I remembered he once said the land was special, but I had ignored it, focused on Amanda, on survival. Now I saw it differently, not as forgotten property, but as a chance. A key to something new. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old paper, and I sat nervously as he read through the documents. "Do you realize what you have here?" he asked, eyes wide. The land had been rezoned for commercial development years ago, and its value had skyrocketed. He estimated it at over $2 million, and I felt the room spin. I had been sleeping in a freezing room, while this miracle had sat in a dusty box above my daughter's garage. Tears filled my eyes, not from pain but from a strange sense of justice. Life hadn't forgotten me, it had just been waiting. I sold the land quietly, without telling Amanda or anyone. With that money, I bought freedom. Not revenge, not power, but peace. And with it, I began to dream again. I didn't breathe a word to Amanda. Instead, I moved silently and deliberately, hiring a lawyer to handle the sale and a discreet broker to find me a home by the coast. The house I chose had large windows, ocean air, and a garden filled with jasmine. I hired an architect to restore its charm and a landscaper to bring it to life. Teresa moved in with me, not as a guest, but as family. For once, I had a home that reflected me, not what others needed from me. Though the view was breathtaking and the silence comforting, I still woke at night with Amanda's words echoing in my ears. I wasn't angry, I was bruised in a place no one could see. I spent my days planting roses and my evenings reading under a soft lamp, wondering when my heart would stop hurting. I didn't seek revenge, only space to breathe. The life I built wasn't to prove anything, it was to finally exist on my own terms. One afternoon, the phone rang. Amanda's voice, syrupy and soft, came through as if nothing had happened. "Mom, I've been thinking about you," she said, her tone soaked in artificial sweetness. She had heard through a neighbor that I was living like royalty and suddenly wanted to reconnect. I agreed to meet her, not out of hope, but for closure. I needed to look her in the eye and see what remained, if anything, of the daughter I once loved. I wore my best dress and greeted her at the door of my coastal home. She arrived in a luxury SUV, wide-eyed and clearly unprepared for the elegance she found. "You live here?" she asked, stunned. I smiled politely and invited her in, offering tea like a perfect hostess. Inside, every room whispered that I was no longer the same woman she had thrown away. Amanda walked through the house in silence, her eyes darting from the grand piano in the corner to the view of the ocean beyond the balcony. She sat down on the velvet sofa, clearly trying to find the right words. "Mom, this place is unbelievable," she said, her voice filled with something between awe and envy. I poured her tea, adding a slice of lemon the way she used to like it, though I noticed she didn't thank me. Her silence was heavy, filled with questions she didn't yet dare ask. I waited. I let her absorb it all, the comfort, the beauty, the life I had built without her. It was important she saw it, that she understood what she had lost when she made her choice. I didn't offer explanations. I didn't brag. I simply existed, fully and without apology. For the first time, the power had shifted, and Amanda felt it, not through anger, but through grace. Amanda finally broke the silence between us with trembling lips and glassy eyes. She began crying, saying she was sorry, that she missed me, and that life hadn't been the same without me. Her husband had lost his job, she whispered, and the bills were piling up. I watched her closely, every word carefully measured, every tear too conveniently timed. I said nothing, only offered her more tea and nodded, letting her drown in her own performance. She talked about the children, about how they asked where their grandmother had gone. Her voice cracked as she mentioned Christmas, pretending to forget the cruel note she gave me last year. I remained composed, even as old wounds threatened to reopen. It wasn't real remorse, it was survival wrapped in desperation. And still, I didn't flinch, because I already knew this Amanda wasn't crying for me, but for herself. After minutes of feigned emotion, her tone shifted. "Maybe you could come back, stay with us, just for a while," she said, eyes darting toward her designer bag. Then came the real request, help with the mortgage. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly ironic. I looked at her without blinking and said, "You gave me 48 hours. I'm giving you 10 minutes to finish your tea. The air between us froze. She stared at me in disbelief, clearly not expecting resistance. The silence between us was louder than any insult. I had waited years for that moment, not for revenge, but for the clarity it brought. I wasn't the same woman she threw out like garbage. I was stronger, wiser, and finally unafraid to say no. Her calm shattered instantly. She stood and began shouting, accusing me of being heartless, of turning my back on my own daughter. "You're my mother," she screamed, voice shrill and desperate. I looked at her with a steady gaze and replied, "And I was your daughter's mother. Until you decided I was disposable. Then I dropped the final blow, I've changed my will. You're no longer in it." Her face went pale. She called me cruel, said I was punishing her for one mistake. But it wasn't one mistake, it was a lifetime of taking and abandoning when it no longer served her. She had treated love like a loan, expecting returns with interest. I had finally broken the contract. As she stormed out of the house, I didn't follow her. I stayed in my chair, surrounded by peace, and for once, power. Amanda stood in the doorway, trembling with rage. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice no longer soft or sweet. I looked her in the eye and answered calmly, "Maybe. But not as much as you'll regret giving your mother a deadline for Christmas." She blinked rapidly, the words hitting harder than any slap. She turned, slammed the door, and disappeared into the life she had chosen over mine. I sat there, motionless, staring at the door she had once opened as a child with drawings in her hand. That door had closed for good now, not just physically but in my soul. I felt no joy, only the weight of a final decision. I hadn't won anything, I had simply refused to lose myself again. And in that silence, I finally found peace. Later that night, I wandered through my house, unable to sleep. Something pulled me to the desk in the study, to a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Inside, tucked between old receipts and forgotten cards, was a folded letter with glittery stickers. It was from Amanda, written when she was 8. "You're the best mommy in the world," it read in shaky handwriting, full of hearts and hope. I held the letter against my chest, breath caught between sorrow and nostalgia. That version of Amanda, the one who loved me purely, was gone. But the memory of her still lived in ink and paper, in promises made by a child who hadn't yet learned cruelty. I folded it gently and placed it back where I found it. Some memories are too fragile to destroy, even if the person attached to them no longer exists. News travels in whispers, especially in small towns with long memories. People began to talk, neighbors, old friends, even strangers, all curious about the story behind Amanda's sudden fall from grace. The truth came out slowly, like a storm building far off at sea. Clients stopped calling her. Invitations disappeared. Her name, once respected, now lingered in conversations like a stain. No one said it to her face, but the shift was unmistakable. Even her husband's silence could no longer protect her. Real estate deals collapsed. Social ties unraveled. The woman who had once stood on polished marble now found herself on uncertain ground. And I, quietly watching from a distance, felt neither satisfaction nor pity, only the justice of consequences finally arriving. Weeks passed before the phone rang again, this time with no sweetness in Amanda's voice. She was crying, real tears now, cracked with fear and exhaustion. "Please, Mom. We're going to be evicted. The kids are scared." "I made a mistake," she said between sobs. I closed my eyes and let the silence answer her. My heart ached for my grandchildren, but I couldn't let Amanda's desperation become my chain again. She begged, reminding me of old memories, pleading for forgiveness. I stayed quiet, listening to every word, knowing this wasn't about reconciliation, it was survival. Amanda was drowning in the consequences of her own decisions, and for once, she had no lifeboat. I didn't hang up. I didn't yell. I simply said, "I'll think about it," then ended the call with a hand that shook in sorrow. I couldn't let children suffer for the sins of their mother. So I contacted her landlord anonymously and paid 2 months of rent, buying them time. I arranged for groceries to be delivered weekly under a different name. I never spoke to Amanda again, never sent a message. I helped without being seen, not for her, but for the innocence she had brought into the world. Every box of food, every quiet payment was a tear I didn't cry. I told myself I was doing the right thing, but the weight of silence still pressed on me. Amanda would never know it was me, and I preferred it that way. She had to understand that love, once broken, couldn't be demanded, only earned. I was no longer the woman who begged to stay, I had become the one who chose when and how to give. One rainy morning, there was a knock at the gate. I opened it to find Amanda's ex-husband standing there, drenched and awkward. He looked older, more tired, like life had carved regret into his face. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said. "I tried to stop her that day. I wanted to speak up, but I was afraid of what it would do to us." His voice cracked with honesty. I invited him in, not with warmth, but with dignity. We sat by the fire as he admitted his silence had haunted him. He said he admired my strength and regretted not defending me. I forgave him because he came with truth, not excuses. He didn't ask for anything, and maybe that's why his apology mattered. Some wounds heal when someone finally says what should have been said long ago. The pain needed somewhere to go, so I gave it a purpose. With Teresa's help, I created a foundation for elderly people who had been abandoned or left behind. We offered food, shelter, and most importantly, dignity. I poured myself into the work, transforming every wound into action. The people who came through our doors weren't just statistics, they were reflections of everything I had survived. Each story I heard added another layer to my resolve. Men and women who had built families, only to be forgotten in silence. I listened, I held their hands, and I reminded them they still mattered. The foundation became more than a project, it became my second chance. In helping others, I was slowly stitching myself back together. A local journalist visited the foundation one morning, curious about the woman behind the quiet success. I agreed to speak only under anonymity, never expecting what would come next. The article was published 2 weeks later, and it spread like wildfire across social media. My story, a mother cast aside, who rose again to lift others, touched something in people. I received letters, calls, even visits from strangers who said I gave them courage. I didn't feel brave, only necessary. I hadn't done any of this for praise or attention, but the recognition brought validation I didn't know I needed. Messages came from other mothers, other daughters, people who had loved too much or not enough. They saw themselves in my wounds, and suddenly, I didn't feel so alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen not just by others, but by myself. On my 74th birthday, a letter arrived in handwriting I recognized immediately. It wasn't dramatic, just honest, raw in a way Amanda had never been before. She said she was ashamed, not because of public judgment, but because of the silence that followed. Her children had asked why their grandmother never visited, and she hadn't known what to say. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness, it simply admitted the truth. She wrote about the coldness in her heart and how she realized too late what she had destroyed. She said she didn't expect anything from me anymore, but that she wanted me to know she understood now. I read it 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it beside the one she wrote as a child. It was the first time in years her words carried no manipulation, only remorse. And that, somehow, hurt more than the betrayal ever did. I agreed to see the children, not Amanda. We met in the city park, near the pond where I used to take her when she was their age. They ran toward me with open arms, shouting Nana, like no time had passed. I held them tightly, hiding the tears that burned behind my smile. They hadn't forgotten me, and somehow, that was enough to breathe again. We sat on a bench, and I listened to their stories, their laughter, their innocence untouched by the cruelty of adults. I brought gifts, books, toys, homemade cookies, the same way I used to when Amanda was little. For a moment, it felt like I had been rewound to a simpler time. Their eyes held no judgment, only love. They didn't care about the past, only that I was there now. Slowly, Amanda began appearing again, always at a distance, always careful not to cross the invisible line I had drawn. At first, she stayed back, letting the children run to me while she waited under a tree. Then came soft hellos, cautious smiles, and awkward goodbyes. I didn't shut the door on her, but I didn't open it fully either. I needed to know she was willing to earn her way back, not demand it. We spoke only in public, never about the past, only the present. She respected the boundaries, and in that quiet respect, something fragile began to grow. Trust couldn't be rushed, it had to be rebuilt brick by brick. Each time she kept her word, I led her a step closer. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the path toward it. 1 year later, Christmas came with no expectations and no pain. Amanda and I didn't exchange gifts, but we shared something more valuable, purpose. We spent the day together at the foundation, serving meals and handing out blankets to people who reminded me of who I once was. The children helped too, laughing as they passed out cookies and warm socks. The building was filled with music, not silence. For the first time, Christmas meant more than decorations or tradition. It meant connection, not perfection. Amanda didn't cry, didn't apologize, she just worked beside me, quiet and steady. I didn't need her tears anymore. I needed her effort, and that, finally, she gave. Amanda once told the world I was a burden, something heavy and inconvenient. Now, at a charity event, she introduced me with trembling pride as the strongest woman I've ever known. Her voice didn't shake out of fear, but from truth. The room applauded, but I didn't need the noise, just the look in her eyes. She finally saw me not as a shadow from her past, but as a light she had once turned away from. I didn't forget what had been done, but I no longer needed to carry it like armor. Our relationship wasn't what it used to be, maybe it never would be, but it was real, rebuilt brick by cautious brick. She helped at the foundation, visited more often, and spoke less of regret and more of gratitude. It wasn't redemption wrapped in words, it was change wrapped in action. And that, to me, was enough. I rewrote my will without hesitation. Half of everything I owned would go to the foundation, ensuring that no elder would feel as forgotten as I once did. The rest I placed in a trust for my grandchildren, untouched by their parents' mistakes. They would grow up knowing where they came from, not through stories, but through love. I didn't leave Amanda with nothing, but I left her what she needed, the lesson. I wanted to be remembered not for what I lost, but for what I built from the ruins. Dignity had been stolen from me once, but I reclaimed it with every act of purpose. My name, once whispered with pity, now stood for resilience. I left behind more than property, I left proof that broken hearts can still build homes. And that sometimes, healing others is the final step in healing yourself. To anyone who has been discarded by the ones they raised, I offer this truth: your value does not fade when others fail to see it. Love given freely is never wasted, even if it is returned with silence. You are not invisible. You are not weak. You are not broken beyond repair. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not vengeance, it is becoming whole in spite of the cracks. I was abandoned, betrayed, erased, and I lived anyway. I found purpose where there was once pain. And if I could rise from the ashes of my own heartbreak, so can you. The world may forget you. But you must never forget yourself. I started writing letters, not to Amanda, but to my grandchildren. Little notes tucked into books, hidden in pockets during our visits, filled with stories from my past and lessons I wished someone had told me sooner. They would one day read them as adults and understand the woman behind the silence. I didn't want to be remembered only as their grandmother, but as a woman who fought to reclaim herself. My life had been stitched together by sacrifice, but now it held shape through purpose. Every day at the foundation felt like a small miracle. I watched as strangers arrived carrying nothing but shame and left with a spark of dignity in their eyes. Sometimes they asked about my story, and I would smile and say, "It's long, but it ends well." I no longer needed to share every wound to prove I had healed. My survival wasn't about bitterness, it was about becoming whole without apology. Teresa became more than a friend, she became the family I never expected to find. We celebrated birthdays with music and dancing, made tamales at Christmas, and built a rhythm of laughter that filled the halls of our home. She had lost her sister years ago, and in me, she found someone to protect. We cared for each other in ways words couldn't explain. Our bond was quiet but unbreakable. One afternoon, Amanda brought the children to the foundation, not for a visit, but to volunteer. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a plain white shirt and tired eyes. She didn't ask for attention or praise, she simply worked, quietly folding blankets, helping an elderly man into a chair, handing out soup with a soft smile. I watched her from across the room and didn't approach. I didn't need to. Later that day, as I was locking up, Amanda waited outside. She didn't speak right away, just stood in the cold with her hands in her pockets. "I know you may never forgive me," she said finally, her voice steady. "But I'm not asking for that anymore. I just want to be useful to something good." I nodded once. That was all she needed. That was all I had left to give. Time passed, and with it came peace. Not perfection, not forgetting, but peace. I still had moments when the past whispered too loudly, when the ache of old wounds returned. But I had learned to sit with it, to let it pass without letting it take me down. Life had hurt me, yes. But it had also offered me a second beginning, and I had taken it. In the quiet mornings by the coast, I began painting again. Watercolors of jasmine, oceans, wrinkled hands holding teacups. Each painting was a memory, sealed in color. The children said I should hold an exhibit, but I laughed. "These are just for me," I told them. After a lifetime of giving everything away, I had finally kept something for myself. One of my final letters, written in delicate script, said, "If you're reading this, I'm probably dancing somewhere, barefoot, under the stars." I wanted them to remember me like that, not broken, not abandoned, but full of life until the very end. I didn't want mourning. I wanted memory. The kind that warms the chest and makes people smile through tears. The day I left this world, the foundation held a candlelight vigil. People I had never met stood side by side with those I had loved, each holding a flame. Amanda spoke briefly, her voice cracking. She taught me what strength really means. And she taught me that love doesn't end when people fail you. It just finds new ways to shine. No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence said everything. And so, my story, once written in sorrow, ended in light. Not in the way I expected, but in the way I needed. I had found dignity in despair, purpose in pain, and connection in the unlikeliest places. For those who feel forgotten, know this: you are never truly alone. Somewhere, someone sees you, and if not yet, then one day, you will see yourself. And that, my dear, is enough. I began to keep a journal beside my bed, not of sorrow, but of small miracles. A neighbor leaving flowers on the gate. A child at the shelter remembering my name. A quiet afternoon without pain. I didn't write for anyone else. I wrote to remind myself that joy had finally returned, not loud or dramatic, just steady, like waves. Amanda started visiting the foundation more frequently, never asking for special treatment, never acting like she belonged. She swept floors, repaired shelves, carried boxes. Her children, now growing fast, moved through the halls with ease, helping and laughing as if it had always been their second home. I never told her she was forgiven. But I didn't need to. She had stopped asking, and started doing. One night, as we locked the doors after a busy event, Amanda lingered. She looked at me, not as a daughter begging for approval, but as a woman learning to rebuild. "You were right," she said softly. "I didn't lose you because I was cruel. I lost you because I stopped seeing you." The words didn't heal everything. But they mattered. Because they were true. Teresa, ever the quiet anchor, smiled from across the room. She had been the first to see me when I was invisible to everyone else. "You don't owe me anything," I had once told her. She laughed and replied, "Then we're even." Her loyalty never wavered, even as our lives changed. Some souls enter your life to remind you what love without expectation looks like. One afternoon, I found a painting Amanda had made. It wasn't professional, but it was sincere, a watercolor of a woman planting flowers near the sea, her back bent but strong. In the corner, she had written, "Rooted in pain. Bloomed anyway." I didn't cry. I simply placed it above my writing desk, beside a photo of her as a child, and one of the foundation's opening day. The children often asked me stories about the old days. I never sugarcoated the truth. I told them about strength, yes, but also about fear, doubt, and silence. I wanted them to grow up knowing that love can be fragile and still be real. That people can fail you and still change. And that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. I began hosting Sunday dinners again, something I hadn't done since before the exile. Teresa would make her famous lentil stew, Amanda brought her homemade cornbread, and the kids always insisted on helping set the table. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. We just made room for what was happening now. Healing, in its quiet way, became part of the recipe. There were moments, brief but sharp, when the past returned like a shadow. A smell, a phrase, a holiday. But I had learned not to fight those memories, only to greet them, then let them pass. I no longer lived in the house Amanda threw me out of. But I had built one within myself, solid, warm, and mine. The community began to see me not as the woman with a sad story, but as the woman who had rewritten her ending. My name became tied to the foundation, to strength, to compassion. Schools invited me to speak. Churches quoted me in newsletters. I never asked for recognition, but when it came, I accepted it as something I had earned, not something I had been given. One day, Amanda sat beside me on a bench outside the foundation. "I used to think you were just a mother," she said. "But now I see you were a whole world." And I lived in it without ever looking around. I didn't answer right away. I just reached over, took her hand, and held it. That was enough. In the last pages of my journal, I wrote, "I lost a home, but I found myself. I lost a daughter, but gained a woman. I lost the past, but claimed the present." These words were not written in bitterness, but in clarity. I had been broken, yes. But not beyond repair. And when my time comes, because every story ends, I want those who loved me to say not that I was perfect, but that I kept going. That I planted seeds in broken ground. That I turned silence into shelter. That I chose love, not because it was easy, but because it was right. And if they remember that, then I will have lived well.